Awesome. Okay, everybody. Welcome to this final workshop on nutrition essentials. I'm Dr. Kristen Zawada at Monarch Family Chiropractic. So happy to have all of you with us tonight. And hopefully we get a little spin on Dr. Mayakin's presentation, bring in some additional and different material so that we can challenge you in different ways to how you can support your nutrition and decrease your inflammation in your system based on a couple key things that we need to, I think, all watch and address in our day-to-day, weekly, and monthly, yearly habits for long-term longevity. And biggest thing that this topic is going to be focused around is just decreasing inflammation in our systems and what rids of things that build up in our systems, which plays a huge part in how we can process and utilize what we put in our bodies, right? We need to put good in to get good out, but we also need to be able to process that. We also need to be able to break down things that aren't so great that come into our system that impede that process. So with that said, we're going to do a couple slides that you will be familiar with if you have been on Dr. Mayakin's nutrition essentials before. And I'll see if they'll pop into my screen here for you to see. Okay. There it goes. So I'm going to run through a few of these concepts and just stats quickly so we can get to some of the material about things we want to focus on for this particular lecture, but also know if you want any more of this detail, we have it. It is recorded and it is also posted on the YouTube channel under Nutrition Essentials as well. So if you see any of these slides or I'm flying through some data and you want to grab that, know that that information is available to you on the YouTube channel for Monarch Family Chiropractic. So we're looking at how we know that Americans are very deficient in minerals and vitamins, and that is a big important fact in what results in disease in our bodies. So when we think about nutrition, we talk about how deficient we are, and it's mostly because the soils and the crops that we produce our food in have been so overused that we don't have a mineral and vitamin balance and nutrition content in the soil. It no longer contains enough of those minerals that we need. And so we eat more, but we are actually more starving because we're not getting the nutrients in our foods from most things that we eat. We can obviously do more organic and things that don't have pesticides and different toxic chemicals brought into them. So I think we all have learned how huge that is, that we trend that way of being, because we're overfed but undernourished. That's led to a lot of the diseases in our country. Obesity being one of the biggest ones on the rise and has been for the last decade or two. There's lots of stats there about how that has evolved. 42% of adults, even back 5 to 7 years ago, were at that obese marker. And we're seeing that more and more with childhood. Again, less activity, poorer foods that are processed and or just are not nutrient dense. And so they're just more fillers than they are supportive to our systems in growth and development and brain function and overall ability to just have good output, right? What a lot of that leads to over years and decades is inflammation. A lot of low level but unneeded inflammation in our system that is what overall causes things to go into a diseased state. So a big one that we're going to touch on in just this piece because of how it relates to some research we're going to cover is the fact that heart disease, as we all I think have known now for some time, continues to be that leading killer of Americans at least. And I think it's just a crazy, startling statistic that we have a heart attack every 40 seconds in our country. So not okay with me, sure not okay with all of you that are health conscious people, especially on this lecture tonight. So we know stroke, diabetes, there's lots of other factors there that definitely attribute to diet and nutrition. And we're going to focus on a couple of them because of just some other research that is out there. We know that these are a lot of what our country consumes. So these are the top 20 carbohydrates in an American's diet. that has been published. So even just looking at the first column, we see how much of that is just food that is starchy and is coming from things that create more inflammation in our system. And really, because they create that sugar content, the carbohydrates, when our body breaks them down, makes it be a sugar. And if it's not the right complexity, it takes our body a long time to break that down. Then it makes those sugar levels stay high. We then just store that as fat because our body cannot utilize it, and rid of it, if you will. It also has a lot of toxicity of things in it because a lot of that stuff is processed. And so therefore that stuff hangs on into our system much longer and becomes slows us down, if you will. As we go into, I know Doc has another one, I might have accidentally bypassed it. Yeah. Here's another survey that was done not all that long ago. And we're talking about where Americans spend their food dollars. Again, even if we only look at the first 5, it's things that are very processed, have a lot of chemicals in them, like Coca-Cola, like any kind of sodas, especially when you get into artificial sugars, when you're talking about diet products, all of those with that artificial sugar is known to cause cancer. That's another one we're going to hit on a bunch that is targeted in this, the studies we're going to look at tonight is the heart disease and cancers. I don't think it's anybody's news that what cigarettes cause for us with the toxicity there, but the fact that it's #1 on the list, not all that many years ago, also blows my mind. So as we get into factors of simplifying food choices, we're going to talk about, Doc spends time in the latter part of her presentation with nutrition on real foods, how to cook, how to eat, what to shop, shopping the perimeter, that clean 15 and dirty dozen that she talks about as far as where to find your foods and how to minimize the amount of products that are in your food. So ingredients for something, if it's under 5 or 6 ingredients in a dish, is usually then overall very healthy things and not a lot of additives, preservatives, and all of that again make for better food choices and a more whole, well-rounded food that we can break down better, utilize better for our fuel to our body, and sustain that fuel, meaning we don't feel hungry 30, 40 minutes, an hour later and reach for more calories or more food. So there's things that we touch on here: proteins, fats, carbohydrates. It all matters how you eat real foods. But what we're going to focus on and kind of change the trajectory of the conversation in this workshop is going to be more about some of the reports that are out there that are not even quite 10 years old, but things that are being done to change this. And we're going to look at some foods that we can eat and go back to that at the end and talk about some things we can make sure are in our diet and why they're important that they're in our diet. But I want to cover some research that we've not touched on before. And it's a process that I feel like it's good to empower people to feel like when they make their choices or when they're picking things or looking even at supplementation, because unfortunately in the real world, because our foods are so depleted of the nutrients we need, even when we're eating organic at times, or most of the time, we need to have a process in our system that happens that some of the nutrients and some of the minerals come from in the environment and come from our foods, but we just don't get enough of them. So the things that break down something that we put into our body that's not the best for us can't necessarily be gotten rid of through our body because we're not getting enough foods that have that quality that breaks things down. So one thing I'm going to share some information about with removing toxins and carcinogens from our body, because we saw that those top 5 and top 10 food items that we either spend the most money on in our country or consume the most of in different facets from our young adults to our older adults is all creating things that are creating toxins that stay in our system and the carcinogen factor, which really breaks down to things that are going to be creating major risks for cancer in our body and in our environment and our system and in our younger adults, as we're seeing now, not just in older adults. So there's a couple reports that I'm going to throw up here, and it may be too wordy for you to necessarily want to read now, but they're all here and available for you guys if you were to want them. So I'm going to read a couple pieces off of this page, but Glucarate is a really key factor that is being played in the role of the process that our body needs to do to be healthier, to break down toxins and chemicals and things that we ingest, whether it's environmental or from our foods and things we put into it. So when we talk about deglucarate, this is a piece of how the body needs to break down a quality within it once it's ingested at the cellular level. So we're not talking about just liver cleanse, colon cleanse, gut cleansing, liver, kidney, just certain organ systems. This is at the cellular level. This needs to happen. So when we talk about from chiropractic, above, down, inside out, we need to attack things at the cellular level that support our entire body's ability to function better, not just an individual organ. So in this report, it's really through some supplementation is where I learned about these doctors doing this research. And so when we talk about the few different things, I'm going to hit on some of the things it talks about in here, which is just based on scientific estimates. It's been stated that greater than 80% of all cancer deaths are related to the use of the tobacco products, the things we eat and drink, exposure to sunlight, ionizing radiation, and exposure to cancer-causing chemicals found in environment and in our workplace. Also, obviously, some in our foods. And it's also no doubt that some people are more sensitive to things, but what they also stated with this research was that it's personally controlled lifestyle factors that account for the major cancer risks experienced by mankind in our world, in our country, especially. So when we talk about this deglucarate, this is a non-toxic natural substance found in fruits and vegetables. And many studies are showing of how it's so highly protective against cancers and those type of inflammatory conditions and diseases, which most every type of disease is inflammatory based, right? So there is a bazillion researchers behind this, and I'm going to scroll through this so that if that's of interest to you, this entire page is all references and the types of people involved in this publication. But this is done by AMC, so Cancer Research Center, that's right here in Denver. And this Dr. Anderson and the people that are involved in this research, and Dr. Thomas Slaga that you're going to see that talks about this gluconerization that we're going to hit on today. And I'm going to try not to get too heady or sciencey with you, but explain this process of what happens in our body and why this is such an important piece to health and decreasing inflammation, is that these are, this is the #2 cancer center in the United States. And so when we're looking at big things that affect our system, and again, cancer over time is inflammation and cells changing and mutating to be an unhealthy cell and then mutating to be more of those unhealthy cells, right? That would be what creates a tumor, just to simplify that. There's a lot of areas this was focused on, but biggest one was lung, skin, liver, breast, and colon cancers. All found remarkable changes when you're incorporating in this deglucarate factor, if you will, and then the gluconerization process that can happen if you have enough of the deglucarate in your diet and in your system. So this talks about some of the effectiveness. I'm not going to go into all the different pieces there, but want to go into this interview with Dr. Thomas Slaga and what it is that we're doing and what it is that they're seeing. So knowing that it's decreasing that, what our goal is that we're enhancing the detoxification of the carcinogens or androgens, which appears to be the mechanism by which this inhibits a lot of those cancers, right? When you have this deglucarate process. It's protective against that calcium deglucarate. So that way it's saying that when you have that protective mechanism, the cancers cannot produce under that kind of state. So the inhibiting of some of that process is because that detoxification can happen with those tumor markers and those parameters. So they're not seeing parameters go up when there's enough of this process happening in your system at the cellular level. So how I like to describe this process, without going down too much of how the Q&A that's in that page right there, is when we have a toxin that comes into our body, and our body has to process something also that it doesn't recognize. This process of gluconerization that they're showing in those little pictures in the middle of the screen there is that we basically have a cell, and think about the fact that it has a receptor on it. And when we have too much toxicity or things that come into our system, it blocks that receptor. So almost I think about like a Pac-Man, and that receptor site is here. It needs to recognize good and bad going by it, things that are you and things that are not you, like a cancerous cell or something that's mutated and changed and is foreign to your body. Instead of knowing that, a lot of times the receptor site gets blocked, and then that the body doesn't recognize and can't see those other things going by it as well. So it's like having blinders on it. And so we don't want that receptor site covered. In a process like gluconerization, it's a way of getting rid of a toxin that's attached to a cell or to, multiple places in our body, and cleaving the bond, taking that toxin and removing it, and then not just telling that toxin to go float around wherever, but to take it and to make it water soluble. And that gluconerization that happens with other things that we're not going to get into tonight is making that the body able to break that bond, take that toxin, and make it basically water soluble, because many toxins, which store themselves in our fat tissue, because that keeps it away from our organ systems, is something that we need to break down, or that toxin can just float around and attach somewhere else. So this process is really important that happens in our body, so that it breaks it down. It detaches it, it breaks it down, makes it water soluble. Our kidneys and our body can then process it, flush it, and get rid of it for good. So that's a key piece that is really out there in mainstream science and research that is being used, but not being, I feel like, used enough to really tackle things like cancers and inflammatory diseases that are out there that we can really do more, I guess, attacking or controlling of in a very non-chemical way. And so the goal with this is that can they reduce, chemo and different things like treatments like that are killing good and bad cells, and just really tackle the toxins directly. And a lot of this research is out there. And again, it's just whether we're using it or not to that capacity. So when we talk about the process that's happening, glucarate, again, is a component that is in our fruits and vegetables and is also present in the human body. It's just not in as much as we need it to be based on our diet. It is safe and it's not toxic. Has ever been detected in the glucarate part of the component, if you will, before that process happens. It's a pure compound in the molecular structure, and supports that major detoxification pathway that the body needs, which is that gluconerization, that the picture of the things cleaving away from the cell, cleaning out from the cell, and being rid of by the body. There are tons of studies and research effectively showing the prevention with breast cancer, lung cancer, prostate cancer, skin, colon, bladder, and liver cancers. So this research is a piece of that, and there's a lot more out there. So one piece that I thought was good to see is then, where do we find those things in our foods, since we don't get enough of them or eat enough of them? And forgive me as I forget where I have that part of my page. Hopefully I have it here with us. See if I can scroll down to it. There's a piece that if I cannot find it here, we'll pull it into. I forget where they go into it specifically here, but we're going to go into it elsewhere. So I may not be able to pull this up onto the screen for us right now, but I'm going to go into it then because it's not up on this screen. You guys won't be able to see what I'm saying, but we're going to go through different ways and some different things that help with that. And so to recap back to what this process really comes into, and what I think is one of the number one things with inflammation, is sugars. And so I think when you talk about nutrition, most everybody has some version of sugars that may be their challenge. And sugar cravings mean something. And even if we're not a person who likes sugary sweet things, we like things that are may break down as a lot of sugars, like our carbs or our beverages, our alcoholic beverages, things like that. Those are all things that are still sugars that break down. So what sugar cravings really mean is something I want to just end with and address the things and the foods in which we can support the process here of how to have more glucarate, that process into our bodies, and decrease the sugar cravings, which is a lot of times what starts this whole downward spiral of inflammation. So cravings do crop up because there's a depletion. So when we don't have things in our foods, right, the depletion in our soil, then the depletion in the food, it automatically generates usually a depletion of vitamins and minerals, which then gives us that sugar craving. So when we have magnesium deficiency, that is usually sugar craving in the form of chocolate, which is my vice. And that can be a lack of magnesium in the body. So when people say they take calcium and magnesium, that is one reason that is supported for multiple facets in our body, but because that's a version of depletion. Also, when we have deficient in that mineral, it tends to be tied to irritability. It tends to be tied to the high blood pressure. It tends to be tied to insomnia. So people with sleeping issues. So again, tying it back to what are our top things in our country with heart disease and cancers, these are all things that we can be doing something about, which is increasing that magnesium and balancing our gut. We all have heard a lot about our immune system. A big chunk of it is in our gut, is in our digestive system. If we don't have our digestive system in right balance, then we tend to have a barrage of things happen that creates a lot of inflammation. The body works harder to break food down, let alone absorb the things we need from our food that we need to break down and get from it. So there isn't to say that you can't have chocolate. It's thinking about having more cacao in your chocolate. So a really dark chocolate, something that's very rich in magnesium and other actual minerals. There's other things like your dark leafy greens, your beans, your nuts and seeds. Those are all things that Doc talks about. And the other part of the nutrition essential talk that's recorded that she's done that goes into the types of those foods and gives some ideas for what to do and how to eat with them. But those are foods that we can add that all supports this process and increases our levels we need, decreases that inflammation and depletion of things that don't allow our bodies to process. When we understand that microbes that control those healthy and beneficial benefits and effects, then it's easy to see how supporting the gut and having good flora and good bacteria in our gut is what supports the immune system, decreases the inflammation, and again, just allows us to absorb what we're eating in a good way. So balancing gut health is huge. When we have a lot of sugary food, it also causes gut bacteria to become dependent on it. And it can kind of cause a rejection when healthier foods are introduced. So we usually have to start really slow, support cleansing or the gut in good bacteria levels, and then it's easier to introduce foods because you can either process or break them down better. Not enough rest is another huge one when it comes to inflammation in our system and what is ways that create that sugar craving. It changes the way in which our body and our brain processes things. So not enough rest really leads to a combination of reaching for the fast pick-me-ups, right? The sodas, the caffeine, the sugar. So I think that one's pretty much a no-brainer. When it comes to ways to satisfy the sugar cravings, that's where we want to do, I'm going to touch on just these 5 as we kind of close out. And then again, this is all to leave you wanting for some more information. So I'm going to touch on these 5 and then have you, engage with us in the office as to what of those 5 pieces or processes do you feel like is the one you're going to work on if you feel like a nutritional component is part of what you're working on with your self-care. So one of those is eating regularly, small balanced meals. Doc talks a lot about that in the second part of the workshop that she does under her nutrition essentials. What we want to put in there, how we have that healthy mix of protein, fats, and carbs. And how to keep you more full and satisfied for longer. So that is the avocados, the nuts, the seeds, things that have good fats, healthy fats, and fats that don't cause inflammation. Going natural, so naturally sweet foods. This is where the foods that come in to support this glucarate process are those dark leafy greens, but there are a lot of the fruits and veggies like sweet potatoes, berries, apples, pears, carrots and beets. All of those that are good ways to satisfy a sweet tooth, but also are absorbed into the bloodstream slowly, so that's not those big sugar rushes, right? And anything from the fruits and veggies, I always say, go and Google low glycemic index diet, and you'll see what kind of fruits and veggies are in that realm. And those are the ones I tell people to stick with. Find the ones you like there. Get your Z's, right? It is super important that we don't have more of what we call our hunger hormone kick in when we don't have enough sleep. A fourth one is that we're including the good bugs. So we're including the good bacteria and in the microbiome and in our gut. So fruit, yogurt, kefir, the kombucha, sauerkraut, kimchi, all those things that Doc also talks about in the end of her workshop on nutrition essentials, ways in which to prepare that are really good for balancing the gut. And the last one is eating bitter foods. Examples of that would be grapefruit and sometimes leafy greens like an arugula type of leaf, kale, and veggies like Brussels sprouts and radishes. They also help make that sweet food taste sweeter. So when you get that, when you change your diet, you'll notice that your palate changes. And to have that little bit of sugar then is satisfying instead of feeling like I'm going to eat 2 handfuls of M&Ms. I can eat a few and you really notice that taste of sugar and how much that changes your taste buds. So I would wrap up with saying, pick one of those that you want to add into your routine and focus on, and let us know next time we see you in the office which that is. And we can give you more information that helps support that piece for you. Because as we know, doing anything for a couple weeks is really what then develops the habit of that 30 to 90 days, right? Something that then takes what you can do for a week or so and changes the trajectory of it being a more long-term sustainable goal. We know that our taste buds rotate and turn over about every 21 days, which is why they have people that do like a 3-week cleanse. That's where you want to start changing, and it takes at least that period of time for your taste buds to change. So when we're talking about how we can change those things, those are some tips on what types of foods and what types of categories all help support this process for you. So we could spend so much more time together, but I wanted to be able to at least have people open up their mics if they wanted to share anything there or ask a question or share with us tonight, maybe what you would pick as your thing that you want to do before we close out. And I think I can unmute people or bring you back in. Awesome. So anybody who wants to share, I would love to hear your takeaway of maybe something that you would change or add to your diet.
Hey, Doc. I was thinking about doing another sugar cleanse because I fell off the bandwagon of that one. But I remember the sugar withdrawals being pretty strong. So do you have any advice on how to handle that, or how to pace yourself with adding things or taking away things out of your diet?
That's really good. One to ask. I'm not thinking off the top of my head, a piece that I have suggested in the past that helps support that process just to kind of help your body in the phase of that. It is a whole food supplement that we've used and suggested before. I'll come up with that when I see you next this week, and see if that is helpful and something that you can add in that supports sort of that detoxification process when you're coming off of sugars. There are a few things that are helpful for that. And I don't have that at the front of my brain, and it's in a different workshop. It's not in this one, but I will get that information for you that will help. And I know that will then help with the migraines.
Cool.
As you pull that sugar, back out a little bit. But there are some things that help support that when you're kind of going through that harder period of not having. Anything else? Anybody else have any other feedback they want to share? There's also in the article, it just talks about supporting, unfortunately, having to support sometimes with supplementation because we just don't get enough fruits and vegetables in our diet daily. There is a supplement that we use here at the office. I've used it for about 12, 13 years, and it is based around this process of gluconerization. So if anybody has interest in like, okay, I may need to do some supplemental support, this makes sense, but I don't get it in my food, talk to us about it. That's a real thing this day and age because we all don't get it in our diet enough every day, all day. So there is ways you can support this process of cleansing out your system on a daily level, not having to do harsh cleanses often in order to feel like you're giving your system that support for decreasing inflammation and just getting rid of toxins that our body just absorbs because of the world we live in this day. So I really appreciate you all being here and being on the talk this evening with us. We've kept you for 35 minutes, so I'm going to close this out and close the recording. But thank you for joining us. Thank you for supporting your systems, your immune system, your self-care by the things you can do outside of here that only allow your brain and your bodies to work better for you when they are cleaner, clearer, and given it the fuel that it needs to support you in all of your health goals. So I'm going to sign off for now. If no one else has any other questions or things to add, we look forward to seeing you in the office and you sharing your takeaways. Have an awesome Tuesday night.
Great information. Thank you, Doc.
Thanks, Doc.